All right, so team, welcome to the Selenium 3.0 live training. It's the latest version of the Selenium that we are planning to cover in this course of training. We are in demo session 2, so we just had one session 2 days back. It was a free session, and 2 days as well, it's a free session. So typically, I kind of touch based upon, I'm sure most of you would have attended. If not attended, you would have watched the video. If not, I would strongly recommend to go and watch the orientation session. But just quick glance of what we're trying to do is in the course of the entire Selenium testing, we would like to go from a very fundamental level of understanding the need of automation testing. Uh, Basically, since most of you migrating from a manual testing to the automation, the first session we would like to focus on why we need to really, if possible, I'll try to cover that up today, because otherwise a fundamental question that arises in most of the people's mind when we start with an automation, why we need, when this is already working or when this is already there, why are we automating, etc. So if we understand the clear expectation, why we need to do an automation testing, that thing will be more clear. And then I also kind of touch based upon various different automation tools that are available in the market. Like we have it for functional testing automation, non-functional testing. We have test process management tool, etc. Then I kind of explain where the Selenium places. So it is functional testing, typically functional testing for a web application. That's what we've discussed here. Selenium is for functional regression testing automation for web-based applications. I'm sure most of you would know what is regression testing. If not, that is the fundamental need of automation testing. Like, let me just quickly explain what is going to happen, and then this fundamental question should not come up again when we go into it. Let's assume you have the first version of the product. I'm just trying to cover up at high level what is the need of automation or why we go for automation. Suppose you're working on a product, say some insurance related product or a banking related product. Let's assume it's first version that you're testing, and the version is, let's say, 1.0. Let's assume there are about 500 test cases, or to make it simple, let's assume there are 300 test cases that you are going to do it. In the first version, mostly or majorly, you're going to do all these 300 test cases in a manual way. You're going to test them manually. And then, based on the product's roadmap, let's assume you know that very soon, maybe in 3 months down the line, we're going to release to the market, which is 2.0. And then you also know that down the line, in another 2 to 3 months, you'll be having multiple releases going to be happen, like 3.0, or let's say there is at least a roadmap for next 2 to 3 years that you're going to release number of versions. So at least if you think there will be 3 to 4 versions down the line that you're going to release for the product, that is when ideal time to really think about automation. Okay. The reason, because if you think the product is going to stop, let's say after 2 or 3 versions of it, then generally companies will not really invest on the automation. The reason, because the return on the investment that you're going to make on the automation may not be that great if the product is going to stop after few releases. But if the product is going to go for a couple of more releases, then only the return that you're going to, because automation script writing is not something that's going to happen overnight. You're going to spend good amount of working days. You're going to automate all that using freeware or a commercial tool. Obviously, Selenium is, we discussed, it's a freeware tool, but still we need automation developers to automate. So it takes some time, and that return you can get only when you have multiple releases. So let's assume first release, you're going to do everything manually. Then what happens when it comes to 2.0? Can anyone help me? What kind of testing you're going to do when it comes to 2.0? Since you all have a fair idea of manual testing, I'm putting this question to you. What are the things that you will cover it in the next version of the product? So Jairam is saying regression testing. Somebody is saying smoke test. As we discussed, or generally the fundamental rule is that when you get the major build of 2.0, the very first build of 2.0, the first thing that most of you will do is something called smoke testing, right? To ensure whether my build is good enough for further testing or not, whether I can do a detailed testing or not. People call it as smoke testing. People call it as sanity testing. Any other name that you can think of, people call it as. It's also called build verification test. BVT is what people call. That is the first thing that you will do. And a lot of people automate this. This is also a good candidate or a good way of automating it. A lot of people will do an automation for smoke testing or sanity testing. As soon as you get a new build, you will have an automation. Out of 300 test cases, probably there could be some good 30 or 40 test cases which you will run either manually or automatically and say this build is acceptable for further testing, and we'll go do a detailed testing. So that is what the first thing you do, smoke or sanity or BVT. Then, as some of you said, it's called regression testing. But before regression, what you will do something is called the new features. What is that newly introduced in 2.0? So that features you will test, something called new features testing. Let us assume between 1.0 and 2.0, there are some new features like maybe a new payment. Let's assume this is something related to insurance, and there is a new payment option has been introduced, and there is a new report to the customer has been introduced, etc. So you will test that functional testing for the new features. And is it going to be manual or automated new features that you want to test? Typically it would be manual testing because it's just introduced into this feature. So let's assume this is manual. Okay. Then, as most of you said, you're going to do a very important testing called regression testing. What is regression testing? Some features that you have already covered in your 1.0, you're going to repeat the testing again on that. And why we have to repeat the testing on the test cases that we have already covered it in 1.0? The reason because by adding this new feature of payment, adding this new report to the customer, existing payment related test cases, existing reporting related test cases also will have an impact. So you do that impact analysis and then you do something called regression testing. And let's assume the regression testing is something you have to do almost 50%, let's say, which is 150 cases. Out of 300 cases, you're supposed to run all 150 cases again that you have already tested. So even if you run, let's say, 10 test cases per day, you would need 15 working days to really cover all 150 test cases. And if you have, let's say, 3 testers, you would need at least 5 working days to cover this testing, which you have already done it in your 1.0. You're going to repeat in 2.0 because of regression. And the same story continues when you go to 3.0. When you go to 3.0 also, what is going to happen? There will be a smoke test, there will be a new features testing, and there will be a regression testing. Smoke testing or sanity testing, at least half a day job, at least half a day job. 30 test cases if you have to run and all 3 people are going to run, it's a full time, it's a full day job, 1 day job or a half a day job. And again regression. Now how many total test cases we have? Existing were 300, and let's suppose this for new features you have added another 50 test cases. So total you have 300 plus 50. By the time you come to 3.0, you have 350 test cases. And in that regression, let's assume another 100 test cases. So what happens is in the first version, probably people will give you sufficient time because you are doing it for the first time and you have 300 test cases. But as you go into subsequent releases, you cannot really have this luxury of running all the 150 test cases manually running these 100 regression test cases manually, apart from what is newly introduced in this 3.0. That is when the need of automation comes into picture, be it with a HP UFT or Selenium or any other tool. I'm not really talking about that, but why we generally go for an automation testing, because as you go into the next versions of every product, there is a good amount of repetition of the testing. There is a good amount of regression testing that you're going to do, which is already tested in the previous version. So to take care of that, as well as something called smoke testing or sanity testing, as you get a new build, also people would strongly recommend to go for an automation testing. In this whole thing, I have explained automation starting from 2.0, but there is a good set of organizations, there is a good percentage of automation testers who are actually thinking and doing the automation from the first version itself. That means by the time we get the 1.0 into testing, out of this 300, people would automate some of them. At least 150 if you have automated, you're going to save good amount of 50 percentage of the time from the manual testing. Then you might have some questions. Is it really possible to do an automation testing in the first 1.0 itself? Yes, it is pretty much possible. You might have heard about something called descriptive programming. If you're going for HP UFT, something similar, we can do it in Selenium as well. All I need to know to automate is I don't really need an application. I need to know what screens are going to come, which controls are going to come. Let's say, is it going to be a text box, or is it going to be a combo box, or is it going to be a checkbox or a radio button, or it's going to be a table? If I know what controls are going to come and which technology they're going to be developed, be it a web technology or a .NET technology or a WPF technology, etc., I can actually start writing my code in the first version itself. So this is where the companies are also expecting to start automation parallelly along with the development. So that's a good. Anybody has any questions in this before we switch back into the detailed explanation of Selenium related one? Anyone has any questions on why we actually think of automation? So you should not really be thinking of unless you have more than 3 to 4 versions of the product. If you think it is going to stop after 3.0, frankly speaking, you should just continue with manual testing because you won't get much of the ROI. Of course, being a beginner, this is all not your job. There will be a test lead, there will be a test manager. They will think of whether we should go for an automation, should not go for an automation. If yes, then which tool? So we'll take this application, we'll do a POC with all the tools that are available in the market. Suppose along with Selenium, you have other tools also. So we'll do a POC, proof of concept, and then we'll come with a decision. Selenium is the best because it's working for our application, it's free, and most of our development of the application is also on the Java side or Python side. So we can go ahead because it's easy and it's free and it can be automated. So that's how the decision and the decision about the tool, decision about whether we should go for automation or not will be decided. So anybody has any questions, I'll just give quick 2 minutes of pass. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll continue to talk about what we're going to do in Selenium. Okay. 300 manual test cases are converting into 350 automated test cases. No, 300 is your manual test cases. By the time when you come to 2.0, you will have new features added 50. So total is 350. But till now, let me tell you this. Before you start with automation, let me tell you, till now, nobody has achieved 100% of automation. It's typically not a good target to do 100% automation. You will end up with some issues, either certain controls not being recognized by your tool, or see, I mean, even what to automate and what not to automate also, you should be very cautious. Just because my tool is understanding the control and I can automate, you should not automate all 100% of the cases. The return on investment is going to come only when you are going to repeat the testing again and again and again in the future. Suppose there are some test cases related to settings, let's say. It's just one-time job. If you do the settings one time, you're done. Then you should not really be thinking of an automating that, because typically the industry standard is you can automate on an average 7 to 8 test cases per day, medium to complex. So if you're automating all the things, you know how much time you're going to spend. So till now, nobody is generally targets for 100%. Nobody tries to achieve 100%. The best percentage that people think of is like 60 to 70% is a good number. If I can automate 60 to 70% of my test cases, that's really good number for my project. So coming back to that question of 350, even though in 2.0 you have 350, we will not automate all 350. We'll try to automate only the smoke testing ones and the regression testing ones. And if you have done with an automation in one of them, it's not done. You should every time when you go to a new version, you should enhance your smoke testing. Either you should add or remove according to the latest version of the system. Similarly, you should update your regression suite also according to the new test cases that are available. So it's a continuous process of maintaining the automation. If you have just automated once, it's not done. Every release, you have to check what test cases become obsolete. You should remove them from the automation. What is being newly added and important regression, you should cover it in your automation. All right. So any other questions on why we need an automation, how much we should do an automation, how we actually decide on an automation? So that's the typical thing that we try to do in every project and decide on how much we should really doing it, and we do a POC to decide whether this tool works or not. So Selenium is typically for functional, as I say, it's for functional testing, and it's majorly for regression, and that too it's for web-based applications. So you have web-based applications, mobile-based, Windows-based, etc. Typically it's for web-based, and you can also do for mobile applications. Okay, so there's one more question. It's a very good question. I think definitely people will be interested. When automation is done, what will manual testers do? I just covered it in my example. There's nothing called done. You need to continuously monitor it. In the next version of the build, there will be changes in the features. According to that, you have to update your automation suite, or you have to, whatever it became obsolete, you have to remove it from your test suite. It's always a continuous process. There is nothing like, okay, I'm done, completely automated, and I don't need manual testers. Absolutely. But what can happen is, like in the previous example, if you have observed, first version all manual, but I went to second version, at least some part I'm able to do it automatically. So the regression time is being reduced. That much we can do, but you cannot completely replace manual testing. Let me 100% say that nobody can replace manual testing is the best and the exhaustive testing. I'll tell you why. For example, in an automation testing, let's say you automated one test case to open a web page and click on something and check this message is coming or not. That's all your test case. And it's a robot, it's a tool, right? It is going to do only what you have instructed in the program. Open this browser, click on this, and check this message. If there is any other thing happening on the surrounding, suppose on the surrounding there is a new image came up, or there was a wrong image came up, or there was a wrong message came up, the robot or the automation does not know that. But you, if you're being a manual tester, if you're doing the testing of the same test case, launching the web browser, clicking on something and checking for the message, your eyes will even catch if something is happening in the surrounding also. So that's why manual testing is the best exhaustive testing. But why people go for automation testing is the same scenario that I have just explained back. You cannot repeat the same thing for every new version doing the manual testing for regression. It's going to be a time consuming, it's going to be a cumbersome process, and people will not have that much time to wait for 5 days only for your regression testing. So rather, if you have automated that, you can parallelly run it on another machine, and you can continue with your new features testing, which is manual, regression testing, which is automated. So you will come back in 2 to 3 days and say this new features are working or not, along with the regression. But if you're doing everything manually, 3 days for your new features, 5 days for your regression, you would say I need 8 days for the testing. So that's when people will not be really having the time. But let's assume, or let me say it again, it totally not going to. It's the same case with anything. I mean, you're automating everything, right? So you're automating a warehouse, you're automating your testing, you're automating the way we are trying to do certain ticket booking, etc., etc. But still, there will be certain things that we need to continue, that we need to monitor somebody that automation, and we need to enhance that automation to regularly work it. So that kind of small job change will be there, but it will not completely replace your manual testing. No, so there is another good question. Are there any restrictions on what front-end, back-end technologies for the web application? Absolutely no. Web application is a web application. It can be from anywhere. It can be from your Java, JSP side, or it can be from ASP, or it can be from a PHP. It can be from anything. It's just a web application. So as long as it's a web application, your Selenium will understand that. Okay. All right. So let's just come back and try to see what we were trying to understand in the last class was that. So starting from the next session, that's the paid session starting it, we will spend good amount of 3 to 4 sessions on the IDE, which is the recording and playback version of the Selenium tool, to understand how and the basic way of generating the test, how it works on different languages like Java, Python, Ruby, C Sharp, syntax of the scripting, etc. The primary language that, as I discussed, Selenium, most of the people uses with Selenium is Java. And for that, you need to know a bit of a core Java, and you don't need to absolutely worry about it. I will be covering it in the part of the course. Okay. So, and along with, as somebody asked, along with the technology, it can work on different browsers. So Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, Edge. So typically it is going to help you in not just in functional automation, it's going to help you in cross-browser testing as well. Just think of the scenarios again. You have an application and let's say when it is developed, it's primarily developed in IE. Okay, your developers have developed it in IE. And as a first thing, let's say there are 300 test cases, again going back to the previous example, and first you're going to test all these 300 on IE. Now think of repeating all these 300 on various browsers: Firefox, Chrome, Safari, right? Now if you have to repeat all this, it's again all these 300 test cases you have to run. And think about manual testing. If you have to repeat again all these 300 on these different browsers like Firefox, Chrome, Safari, if this 300 would have taken you 30 days, you would typically need again 30 days here, 30 days here, 30 days here. So nobody will have 120 days for just one version to do all these things, right? So that's exactly, again, automation is useful. And especially the scenario that I'm talking about, the cross-browser testing. Developed it on one browser, I developed it on Firefox. With or without a change, Selenium can test on all other browsers. All we have to do is just we have to download that browser extension from the Selenium. Like you have to just go to seleniumhq.org, go to this download section. There are different browser extensions that are available here. Suppose we developed on the Firefox with Mozilla Gecko driver, and then you have to download this Chrome, Opera, Edge, or any other driver, Safari, and it's just one line of code you have to change in the script, which is typically to get these exe files. And if you have done with those exe file change in one line, you're good to go and run it on all other browsers. And you don't need to really run it on parallelly also. Like you don't need to run it like this. First I have to run it on Firefox, then only I have to run it on Chrome, then only I have to run it on Safari. No, there is an advanced concept in Selenium called grid. We're going to discuss that in detail. And using this grid, I can actually run all four parallelly. I can put this on one node, this on another node, This is on another node, and this is parallelly. I can run all four also. So those kind of advantages you're going to get when you actually go into Selenium. You don't see this kind of a feature in typically in other automation tools. So there's something called Grid, Selenium Grid. Using this, I can actually run parallelly. So there's a question from Nita, like, is there any criteria for choosing the language to use with Selenium, like between Java, C Sharp, Python, etc.? So what people tries to do is, again, the percentage I have seen in the industry is almost 80% of the people use Java, being the, uh, I mean, it's almost there for 20 years. Very standard object-oriented programming language, platform independent language. But in the recent past, people even started using Python, because that is also becoming a very standard and robust kind of a language. But the interesting case, if I take C Sharp, right? For example, who will actually, if I give you that example, I think you'll understand which percentage of the people or which people will decide C Sharp. Let us assume in my company, the developers are all from Microsoft technologies, like they develop the products using Microsoft technologies. It's all on ASP.NET, using some C Sharp controls, using some WPF controls on the web. Okay. Since the development team is entirely on Microsoft technologies, and the application or the product is on Microsoft technologies, then there is a decision taken by the QA manager and the QA team to go ahead with the C Sharp, because we already have the in-house knowledge in developers itself, and that can help us, the testing team, when we automate it. And since anyway Selenium supports C Sharp, so let's go ahead with C Sharp. It's just more like a native application is in C Sharp with ASP.NET, and if we can write probably the C Sharp in Selenium, it's just the native. That's how the decision might come. But let me tell you, even if your application is Microsoft technology, even if you use Selenium with Java, it's 100% compatible. There is absolutely no problem you'll get. But just that the company might decide, okay, we already have people who are comfortable with the language, and they may help us, the testing team, as well, if they get into any C Sharp related issues. Okay, that's how the decision will be made. But otherwise, 80% of the people already use core Java. So that's why I have taken this part of the overall discussion. You will be given some sessions on core Java. It's again by me. And then we already have some existing videos. By the way, there's one another advantage of this is, you're going to get the overall course from two different perspective trainers. Like Karthik has already done the entire Selenium course some time back. So you can get to see the existing videos as well. And I did some time back. You can start watching these videos from today until the next session. We're going to have it on the 26th, which is a paid session. And I'm repeating with the 3.0 again. So you can get to see two major trainers' perspective, how this overall tool can be taught. So we have existing videos done by Karthik, and I'm going to do this entire course. So you can get two sets of videos. Okay. So core Java, we already take care of it. So you don't need to really worry about any of that. So this is something that I have explained the overall course, what we're going to do. We'll start with the fundamental Selenium introduction. We'll spend few sessions on IDE. Then we'll understand how Selenium identifies the locators. So typically this is called Locator Identification strategy, or people call it as Locator Identification mechanism. And we're going to look at number of examples on each of them. Especially what is important is XPath and CSS. Like what are these is, just to give you an idea. Suppose if you're going to you want to automate an application, developer will provide, let's say there's a text box, there's a combo box or a list box, and there's a table or a grid, and there is a button, typically a web button. So while developing this application, developer would provide some properties to this. there will be everything is called locator or an object. And how can we differentiate? There will be something called class name. This is a text box. This is a list box. This is a table. This is a button. So in the automation world, everything is a locator, but each locator belongs to some category or some class type. So there will be a property called class name, and there will be something called a text that you can actually see on it. You will see it's probably um, some tools will even give you what is the height of it, what is the width of it, what are the coordinates that it has, etc. But when you actually think of an automation from the beginning, what we should do is, while working the testing team along with the development team, we need to ensure one important thing. We should always instruct the developers in such a way that while developing the applications, ensure that every control is provided with some unique ID. Okay, that is what we call it as ID. If they can provide a unique ID, it is going to be very easy for the automation team, because ID will be unique for every control. If there is an ID for this, it will be different for this, it will be different for this. If you have this automation ID in Selenium, you're going to simply write a code, uh, just identify this control just by using by.id, and then you will mention that ID in your parenthesis, whatever the ID of it. But a lot of times the challenge arises is like when you don't have this coordination between the test and the dev, and if they are not providing these unique identifiers, then is when you're going to do this XPath, and you're going to write this CSS, etc. So all that we're going to look in detail, how we generate XPath, what is absolute XPath, relative XPath, and how do we generate the CSS value. There are some tools available, but first we'll write some examples manually. And the another advantage of having ID is, if you're going to work in a product and that product is going to be localized into multiple languages. For example, you're testing it in English language, but this product is going to be in German, it's going to be in Japan, and it's going to be in, let's say, French. You don't need to really automate the tool again for all these languages. That's another advantage of automation. Why people go for automation? Let's say my team is a localization team, and whatever the product that gets developed in EN/US, I should also test it for German, Japan, French. If you take this text, then it will be a problem, because the text in EN/US, text in your German, Japan, French is different. So that's why it is always better to take ID if you have an ID, because ID is going to be same whatever the language it is. ID is not going to change. So you develop the script only once using ID, and the same script can be run on multiple languages also. The same case with XPath, same case with CSS. But it is not going to be the same case with a text or a link text if you have, because they are going to be changed from language to language. So some of these good examples we're going to understand when we talk about location identifications, etc. So then slowly we'll get into WebDriver basics. So I can suggest you one thing before the next session that we will have is see if you can install the Java. So how you can install the Java is just go to Google and type download Java. Okay, people who, first of all, how do you confirm whether you have a Java or not? You can simply go to command prompt, and you can say, just go to command prompt and type java-version. If you already have Java, you will get what is the current version that's already available here. Okay, but to get to this stage, if you don't have Java, then what will happen when you say java-version? It will give you an error saying the Java is not recognized as an internal or external command. So then what you should do, simply go to Google and type download Java. Okay, just type download Java and go to this oracle.com. Okay, oracle.com. Okay, there is a question I'm just trying to read. Okay, there is another question. If there are two applications that are integrated and you're testing one application, it can get on the other application. So expected results will have to verify on different application. Yeah, that is where the overall system testing or end-to-end testing come into picture. And if that other application is also a web application, your life is easy because Selenium can even understand the other application also. So let's say you have a test case. Step 1, step 2, do it on first application. Step 3 and step 4, you have to do it on second application. You can pretty much do in Selenium because both are web and both can be understandable by Selenium. It is pretty much you can do it. Okay, so simply search for download Java and then go to Java download. You will get to this oracle.com website. You can click on this download Java version. Try to do this before the next session so it'll be easy for us to continue. And here you have the version available for different operating systems: Linux, Mac, Windows, Solaris. If you're on a Windows, pick up this exe file and just install this. After installing this, if you will still not be, even if you go back and type java-version, you will still not be getting it because we have to set something called class path. But let me, is everybody clear on from where you can download the Java and install? Just go to oracle.com or just go to Google and search download Java and then pick up that Oracle link. Come here and pick up the version that based on your operating system and install it. Since I already have it, I'm not really repeating, but just run this, it'll download, and after that you can install. And then after that, try to do this thing as well. If you're running on a latest version of operating system, you can just right click on this PC properties. And there will be something called, or if you're running on an older version of operating system, you can go to my computer properties and you'll see something called advanced system settings. And there'll be something called environment variables. Under the environment variables, you will have to add, there is something called system variable section. Go to the system variable section and there, so typically when I have installed, I have got my Java installed here, right? So when you install, you will choose the path. Like it happened in my case, program files Java JDK. So just go to C drive, it's here. This is where it got installed for me. Okay, I need to just take this path and give it into a variable called, how do you add a new variable is just click on a new and you have to give a variable name called java_home and path, you have to just give this path. Okay, this is giving the Java home path. Okay, so you'll just, after installing it, you add this variable. Apart from this, so you have to add up to this JDK. So in your folder you have two things. One is called JDK, Java Development Kit, Java Runtime Environment. So just go up to this JDK and give this path. And there is one more thing that you also need to do is it will be typically have something called path. There is something called path variable. Just click on edit. You should have Java path as well. If the path is not there, in your case it will not be there, then you will simply click on a new variable. But this time you have to go one more step down. Apart from JDK, you have to go up to bin also and just copy this path and give it into a new variable. You can simply click on new variable and you can type the value here. Since I already have it, it's there here. I'm just canceling it. So these two things you have to do. One is Java home and another one is path. So what is this? We are trying to instruct to your operating system that, I don't want to always go to, in my command prompt, I don't want to always go to C:, program files, Java, JDK, and then run these commands like Java version or any other Java C or Java executable file. Please understand that my Java is here and my executable files or bin directories here. So by giving the Java home, you're instructing where is your JDK. By instructing the class path, you're giving where all the class path files are available. So that way your operating system will understand from now you may be anywhere. I may be in C drive, I may be in D drive. You can go after that, type Java 1 version, you should get it. If you still get any problem, just close this command prompt and reopen it, then it should be fine. Is everybody clear on how to install Java, setting the home path and class path? Just before doing it again, watch the video. You all should be able to do it without really any difficult. That is like fundamental thing that is required for us to work with, work on the Selenium. Is everybody clear? Okay, for Mac, what I can do is I can give you the instructions later in a document. But otherwise, I'm sure it's not a very difficult thing. Just you can actually Google it and you can do it without really difficult. It'll be kind of challenging if I have to repeat it on two different things, Windows and Mac at same time. So it's simple. You can actually just Google it and you should be able to do it. Okay. Everyone just try to do this before the next session so that it'll be easy for us to continue the things. Okay, so just go back to the contents that I was talking about. So this is what is the first thing that we have to do. And then we can actually install the Eclipse IDE as well. So probably I'll take this up in the next session, and then we will start configuring with the Selenium 3.0 files, and then we'll start creating a simple test. But these are some of the things that we're going to do in the WebDriver basics first. We're going to create a simple Java test, and then we'll create a WebDriver test. We'll try to do it for the different browsers, and we'll see examples on different locators, identifications, as I just told. And then we'll use the explicit, implicit statements for synchronizing your tests with the thing. What I forgot to add in the last class that I definitely wanted to cover is we're going to use something called log4j, which is very famous for logging in Java. So we're going to use, we're going to cover that as well. I just missed it in the last orientation. And I do want to mention it's very famous, very popular. People who write the Java programming and Java developers will use this log4j for logging the information. So same case with us. When we automate certain test cases, we need to log some information. So we're going to use this log4j for logging the details for every test case. There's one more thing that I also going to cover is typically, probably I can just put it here, is like alerts. Like when you're running the test, you will get some alerts or pop-ups. How we are going to handle those alerts in the Selenium. So we're going to discuss those as well. But other than that, pretty much these are the topics. Like what we're going to do in the WebDriver basics, I have just explained here. We'll see various examples on different locators, like on edit box. We're going to cover list box, combo box, a grid or a table, a checkbox, web button, and then we're going to try different links on different images, frames. We'll try on each of these with an example. Like for example, if you have a list box, how can I pick up a there are interesting test scenarios that you have to do. For example, there is a list box. You will have to find out whether the particular item exists in the list box or not, or if an item exists more than once. So each of them, we're going to look at an example. First of all, how do we find how many items are there in a list box? Then how can I select a particular value from it, or how can I check whether it is an existing or not? Same case with a table. Suppose you have a web table. how can I read the data from the web table? How can I check a particular value exists in the web table or not? Or how can I write something to the table or read something from the table? So all those things we're going to do it, various examples on them. Then these are part of the WebDriver basics is what I call, and then we'll get into advanced. In basics only, I will be covering the JUnit framework, which is basically for unit testing. All the Java developers will use this JUnit for unit testing. So we'll also see with respect to automation, how can we do unit testing? Of course, unit testing is a responsibility of the developers, but still we'll try to understand what is this JUnit and how developers use it. Then we'll get into WebDriver advanced topics, talk about a framework that most of the organizations, in my case, we are actually using this TestNG framework. We started this automation about 3 years back on Selenium. It's basically for mobile related applications. So we use the TestNG framework for it. So we'll see how can we actually use the TestNG framework. We'll create data-driven frameworks using the TestNG parameters concept. And then, as I said, we'll look at how can we handle alerts, how can we work with Excel files to read the data, write the data using Apache POI. That's going to help us to build a framework called keyword-driven framework, where you can build certain simple English language keywords that other people can actually just write it as an English language test cases without really knowing how Selenium works. And knowing the data-driven test, knowing the keyword-driven framework, we'll also talk about what is a hybrid framework and how can we do that. We'll do database testing using JDBC. We'll work with Selenium Grid. I told you I want to do a parallel testing on my Firefox, Chrome, etc. Then a lot of people are actually recommending or using another model called page object model or page factory. So we'll see an examples using that. And almost all 80-90% of the people use this log4j for logging. So we'll do that. And then we'll get into the continuous integration, continuous deployment of how can we use Apache Maven for build deployment, Git and GitHub for maintaining your source code, Jenkins for continuous integration. And there is a good example of a framework. In fact, I'm sure some of you are attending the AnyAuth framework that we're building as part of the iTeLearn associated company called Workers Inc. So that is similar, I would say, like a competitor to the robot framework, which is same using Selenium 2.0 underneath it. We are trying to build a framework which has almost gone live recently, and there are new major features that are coming up soon. So this is one good example of how people can extend Selenium to the next level. So it's a freeware, it's available with all the libraries. So we can use that libraries and we can build a framework. Like robot framework is one such a framework available in the industry. And we are trying to build a framework called AnyAuth framework on the Selenium. So we would expect it's typically think of an end user or an acceptance testing level. They don't really be good in, okay, once you understand the overall Selenium thing, you'll understand the complexities or the criticality of programming it, and you will, by end of it, when you become master, you'll feel everything easy. But that may not be the case with end users. End users may not be really technical at all, and they don't want to go through even the pain of learning the way you're trying to do and developing the way because their total job is on the business side, thinking about the business scenarios, etc. But then their job is also becoming repetitive testing. Like every time you do a test sign off, they have to do an acceptance testing, right? So then they also don't want to do manual testing for every release that I have explained for multiple releases. So they also need some good framework as somebody has to develop and give it to them. Like obviously it comes on your shoulder because you being an automation test engineer, people will automation the end users will come back to you and ask, hey, can you develop some framework for us so that we can uh, automate our test cases as well? So that's when the keyword driven framework or something of this sort using a Selenium 2.0, you can build a simple framework. Like the best example is people who are attending AnyAuth know. Otherwise, there are some free sessions on the iTeLearn website. You can watch them. That will give you an idea how easy to extend the Selenium to the next level by building your own framework and giving it to your customers. So then finally we'll also see something called Cucumber, which is basically for the behavior driven development. Okay, so this is typically I'm just extending from the last orientation session a little bit of more detail. I'm not really going into the details. Starting from the next session, I will be really installing the Eclipse IDE. I'll be start writing the programs, and then we'll go for the um, one by one examples on different locators and controls. So let me take if there are any more questions before we actually which framework is using for the project. So it depends on the again the same thing, what actually works for the organization and works for their clients and customers, etc. You can create a data driven testing framework if your project is a data intensive project. Suppose your application is related to a customer relationship management or maybe an insurance related information, etc. You're going to deal with thousands of records on a day-to-day basis. So your application is only once, but you have to test it on multiple different types of test data. Then it would be recommended to go for data driven framework. No, you want to build something that, let's say, there are a lot of QA members in the team, not everybody technical, uh, but there are few members who are very good technical, so they can build a keyword driven framework. And all other QA engineers and the end users use those keywords. And I mean, people who don't know keyword driven framework, it just looks something like this. Since I just touched up in the last class, also I want to give a very high level idea. Suppose you have a test case, we'll pick up something an Excel sheet, and we're going to put all those uh, test steps. The main thing that is going to play a major role in the keyword driven framework is there's something called keyword that you're going to build. Okay, suppose let's say the first step is to launch your application, so you will build a keyword called open browser. And that open browser, to open the browser, what you need to give some test data. So let's say which URL it has to open. You will give that URL here. So there's a list of keywords that you will build, like open browser, close browser, click a link, check a link present or not, or check an object or locator present or not, select a value from a list, or search a value in a table. So you'll create some simple English language keywords, and according to your test case, according to the test step, the QA engineers or end users will simply, uh, let's say there is a test step 1 to launch the application, so they'll use open browser and give the URL. Internally, people who develop the framework, they will read this keyword and write a corresponding function to do the job. In the function, you will actually write the code. Open browser means how we actually open it in Selenium. You will create a driver object, and then you will say driver.get, and you give that URL that is coming from here. So that is how application is going to launch. So it's more like abstracting from the other QA engineers. You will write the code, and they will simply use this English language keywords to write the code. You don't need to really know the Java before starting the test. I will take care of it. Okay. As and when necessary to introduce the Java concepts, I will be slowly introducing one by one. All right, so that's again another framework is like page object model, like I kind of touched upon in the last class as well. Most of the people, what they try to do in my web application, suppose there are number of web pages, like at least you'll have, let's say, some 10-20 web pages. I'm going to create a Java class for each of these web page. For page 1, I'll create one class. Page 2, I'll create another class. Page 3, I'll create another class. And within the Java class, I will typically, what is a class is, it will be a collection of member variables and methods is what we call. So all the variables or objects of this up page, I'll take it in this class, and the operations also I'll take it in this class. So something like that, we're going to do a page object model. So that's another thing. There's a question on how many sessions. I clearly, I don't have it in handy right now, but please watch it in the session one orientation. I have clearly showed the schedule in the beginning. So typically it will be, I would say, ID about 3 to 4 sessions. Selenium WebDriver Advanced will be around 15 sessions, and then there's continuous integration, continuous deployments, etc. That will be 4 sessions. So 15 for 19 for 23, and then we will have existing core Java that you have to. We have videos for it, so you'll go through some of the core Java sessions, which are going to be about 4 to 5 sessions. So on an average, you need to spend good 40-45 hours of learning, and then another 40-45 hours of parallel on the simultaneous testing. So typically you need to spend 2 to 3 hours in a day. 1.5 hour is for watching this training or video, and then another 1.5 hour for your practice for the next 30 to 45 days, so that you can be master in this tool. Is TestNG automation similar to robot framework automation? No. Robot framework is, actually speaking, you're not going to write any code there, to be frank. All you're going to do is like the way I just explained. You're going to pick up the keywords and you'll just instruct which keyword and which control and what test data. But TestNG, we're going to write a code. I will be explaining the OOPS concepts a bit as well, not to the detail of required by a developer, but to an extent what is really required, what is an object, what is a method, what is a class, and how we actually pick up those methods for different objects. So I'll cover the required. So I'll really balance it out in such a way that you won't feel like a developer as well as you won't feel like a manual tester. So what is really required for an automation, will take care of that. Otherwise, somebody can just go on talk about core Java only for 45 days. We don't really need that detail. All right. So any other questions? I would like to happily take it up for the next 5 minutes that we have. We're already overrunning, but I'm happy to take for the next 5 minutes if there are any questions. But otherwise, this is typically overall the course. Please watch the orientation session 1 as well, people who have not attended, along with this session 2, and we will be back on uh, from there onwards. It will be a continuous. We will be starting on 26th October, and the timing is same time. It will be 6 p.m. PST to 7 p.m. or we'll just extend another 10 minutes or so. 7 p.m. PST. So it'll be like 60 to 70 minutes of training. All right, and the timing is fixed, so I can confirm this is the timing. And we're starting back on 26th for the paid sessions, and that's where we're going to start fundamentally on all the tools that are required and creating the tests. Any other questions before we close it for today? Or if I missed any other question, please do put it back. Please give some example for log4j. Log4j is for logging. So typically when you automate, you are going to write lines of code, right? You're going to lines of code. And when you write the lines of code, at any point of the time, whether there can be situations where certain things might pass, certain things might fail. So you have to log that information somewhere. So for example, when you run this automation code, you got the result as failed. But why it is failed, you should go back and check in the logs to see where is actually it's failed. So if you logged it at every step what is happening, then you would know where it is failed also. See, the problem is when automation fails or when any test case fails, the challenge or the criticality is going back and analyzing where it got failed. Of course, like TestNG and all generates a nice report, so you know for every step. Even your Java Eclipse IDE will have a logger, it will show it. But a lot of people use Log4j, which is much more advanced way of logging, especially for all the Java developers. They really wanted to have a detailed logging, so they'll use for it. And since we are using, so we'll also do the Selenium as well with the Java Log4j logging. Do you have any load runner certification training? You can please write back learn@iTeLearn.com. I'll ensure if I think we have done it some time back. Uh, I'll ask somebody to reply back. I don't remember at the moment we have the videos, but I know it has been done some time back. So just please write it learn@iTeLearn.com. In an agile environment where we get back to the releases, when will the team work on automation in a small team? So typically, agile will go for about to answer this question simply. Well, let's take a 4 weeks of a sprint. Okay, you have a 4 weeks of a sprint. First 1 week, you will be totally focusing on. Ideally, it's not the same team that you would split into manual and automation. But I do get your question. You have already mentioned it as a small team. If there is a provision in an agile, we would strongly recommend to separate the automation team, at least 1% for automation and 2 to 3% for a manual testing. If you don't have that luxury, if you don't have that budget, still okay. Same team, first week will focus on writing the test cases and test scenarios, etc., for what to test, and then focus on the next second week and third week is actually doing the functional testing, regression testing, etc. And when it comes to the end of the sprint, before the next sprint gets started, you should actually be utilizing the time for automating the test cases of the previous sprint. So you may not start parallel. If you can really do the parallel automation for the same sprint, again, that's well and good. But all depends on the team capability, team whether they can do it or not. Our application is available with, like I told you, if you have to do a parallel automation on the V1 itself, what you need is you need to know what controls are going to come, what properties are going to come, etc. If you have that coordination between the development team, you can actually do that as well. But if not, before you start sprint 2, you should have done the automation for sprint 1, and you'll continue like that. When are you going to have live sessions for ISTQB training? Again, we'll be definitely starting soon, but you don't need to really be waiting for it. What I would suggest is go and register for it. Start going through the videos. By the time you appear for an exam in a month now or so, we should be starting it up. Okay. All right. So that's all for now. Thanks everyone. Okay. Somebody saying, can you repeat this? I was saying in sprints, sprint 1, maybe you focus on the manual testing. But before you get a start of sprint 2, or actually what people can also do is, a sprint is nothing but a collection of tasks that you're going to achieve, collection of tasks that you want to accomplish. There's nothing wrong in putting automation tasks also in the sprint. You can have a discussion with your project manager or product owner and say, hey, in this sprint we wanted to take some automation tasks so that it will help us in the next set of sprints. It will easy way of doing the regression testing, and you can put some task related to automating the thing and get a buy-in from your client or customer. And in the sprint 2, maybe 50% you'll focus on automating certain things that you have not automated. People can do that. Okay. What is a path for Scrum Master certification? That's totally a different thing. There is something called CSM, Certified Scrum Master training. You can go through and then you can take up that certification. All right. So any questions related to whether I can attend the session or not because I'm part of some other course, please write an email to learn@iTeLearn.com, or the regular interaction that you're trying to have with the iTeLearn team. I'm not really be having a complete picture of which membership works for what. So it would be better if you can take it up with the team, and do attend on 26th. You will get an email if you're already part of that. Okay, somebody saying I watched and attended your sessions previously. It's going to be a great experience for learning. Thanks for it. Thanks for the compliment. Okay, that's all for now. See you on 26th. Okay, just set up this Java before you come back, and then we'll take it up in a simple and quick learning way of doing the things. All right, team. Thanks for watching this. See you on 26th.